Womanomics in action. It's well known that money and power go hand in hand. But how is it that women are using their money not only to empower themselves, but including their families and those around them? We live in interesting times, and that's why we're about to host a very bold series of conversations where we really deep dive into understanding the true economic value that women serve. Sure, we might be receiving salaries and payments for the entrepreneurial duties we run, the corporate companies that we work for, but what about the many other roles that women serve that are not quantified? And does this translate to our value in society? Well, it's some tough questions that we need to ask, and we're about to get some honest revelations about this from our guests. We'll also get further insight into understanding how as women we need to adequately plan for our financial journeys and take our loved ones along with us for this journey. So pull up your chair. Let's get talking in the Liberty Blue Table sessions. Well, we're going to speak to a myriad of ladies, some of whom are plant mums, some of them are real moms, and some of them are those with acumen in the financial services space. But the real reason why we're speaking to this vast dynamic of women from all spheres of life is to really understand how we are all in it together. We are in it with you as well as African women. And Pearl, that leads me to lead this question to you. Give us some brief background as to who you are, but most importantly, when was the last time in your life that you felt that someone was truly in it with you?
Hi everyone, I'm Pearl Pillay. I'm the Managing Director of Youth Lab, feminist and resident plant mom. And the first time that I really felt that someone was in it with me was at a res party in first year that I had no business being at. But that was where I met my best friend.
Oluwatu, that makes me want to come to you. I think many of us are familiar with your story, being a real trailblazer in raising the fundamentals of a modern family in this day and age. But when was the last time that you felt that someone was truly in it with you?
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on a panel with such an amazing woman. I'm Oluwatu Lishabane. I'm a digital entrepreneur, I'm a mom of 3 crazy boys. I'm a doting wife. And I think it's not the one time, there's many times, but the most recent time was being caught in the middle of a pandemic with 3 kids, a home to run, 4 if you consider the husband one. But it is when my nanny and domestic decided to stay on with us. Though she has a family of her own, borders are closed, she was frustrated, but she decided to stay on with us and help us through this time, which is a pandemic and dealing with 3 little ones. So I don't think anyone who has so stressed during a time such as this would imagine staying on and helping a mom be able to manage with the load and manage with work. So that was the last time somebody made me feel like they're in it with me.
So it's amazing the amount of sacrifice that women can make within different spheres of society, as well as the human connections we make, even in the most unusual of spaces. And sometimes when we think about those who are using their financial acumen to empower us economically, we often think of an Excel spreadsheet. And Daphne, that leads me to you to actually get more perspective behind how you not only nitpick at numbers to really help women empower themselves financially, but most importantly, when was the last time you felt that someone was really in it with you?
Hi everyone, I'm Daphne, a lead specialist at Liberty Investment Planning. And yes, I'm very passionate about empowering women when it comes to financial planning. And the last time I felt or someone was in it for me was when I was pregnant with my second little one, and my sister, who was there from morning to noon and had my back 100% whilst my hubby was away traveling. So yeah, that's someone that I really, really felt that was in it for me.
Now, we start off our first episode for Liberty She Talks in really interrogating what it is to be a woman and the economic value that we contribute. Some might call it womanomics. Some might just call it women finding their ground in terms of some kind of gender parity pay, as well as breaching some of the shortfalls that we often experience in terms of being undervalued by society and the workspaces within which we contribute. But this is a very important question because as we face the COVID-19 pandemic and the various lockdown levels in South Africa, one thing is for sure, that more than ever, we've seen women have to step up to the plate, not only to be financial contributors to their households, but even contributors to society and their workplaces overall. So what does this mean then for how we actually value our contribution as women within the broader society? Oluetu, I think you mentioned very recently that you've had a few people who have been in it with you, have shown you support as a mother, as a wife, as an entrepreneur. How do you actually value and evaluate your contribution to your home and to the broader South African economy?
Thank you so much, Gugu. I mean, women have previously always been left behind. And I think in an economy like South Africa, we need to firstly be very intentional about how we bring women forward economically. I've learned throughout my journey as a woman and a mother, which is forever, that there's certain things, there's the 3 C's that women are not even compensated for. And when they are compensated and they're seen as work, they're undercompensated for them. Cooking, cleaning, caring. We've seen it more than anything during this lockdown, that the primary 3 C's for women are not compensated. I'm still expected to get up from this desk when I'm done here and go downstairs and go prepare lunch for the boys that are going to come out of school at around 12:30. And then there's, I think that there's an appreciation now for those things, and it shouldn't have taken us so long to appreciate that women have to balance these things, and that when it comes to women, there is no balance, so to say, and there's a flow into from one thing where we're compensated from into the 3 C's that we're not compensated for. So it's so good to have conversations with women, for women, where we are intentional that women economically need to play a big part, and I think that's literally what womanomics is that we need to place women at the forefront, and it's about now being able to acknowledge that women need firstly equal pay in the workplace, and then secondly, they need to be acknowledged for the things that they do without compensation.
Great points that you mentioned there, and I think the 3 C's are definitely lessons that we're going to carry with us as these episodes continue to unfold. And Paul, that makes me want to come to you. You do a lot of work within the advocacy space to make sure that women are represented at the table, maybe that we even build our own table, and that we start creating our own rules at these tables of engagement when it comes to the professional space. But what are your thoughts around this? And are we actually making progress, particularly as this new younger generation of women who are entering the world of work with a different sense of mindset?
Thanks, Gugu. I mean, when I think about my own financial journey, I grew up in a home and in a community where you really see the effects that financial dependency has on a woman's ability to navigate her own freedom and her own agency. And when I moved to Johannesburg, that was part of the goals that I had set out for myself, that I was not going to be part of that cycle. And just being a woman who's decided to do it on her own is a difficult journey to walk. The world is not friendly to women who don't fit into roles like wife and mother in ways that are very traditional. And so it's not always the easiest thing. And I think a lot of people kind of look at particularly women who live alone or women that are unpartnered and see them as, oh, well, this should be financially easy for you, right? It's just yourself that you have to look after. But the world is unfriendly. And I think in the work that I've done and in my own personal financial journey, seeing the power that a little bit of agency and a little bit of information can have. I come from a background where I'm self-employed, and the stress of having to kind of build some kind of financial stability whilst being self-employed and managing a company and managing other people's livelihoods is not an easy feat. And so there has to be a reimagining of how we see women and how women's relationships with other people, particularly men, have an impact on our financial wellness. So for me, a lot of this has been about figuring out the ways in which women can be financially empowered, not financially dependent, and be able to make moves and make decisions that affect their own well-being and can be able to secure their own financial futures.
A valid point that you raised there, Pearl, and I can certainly relate. I come from a household with both parents working and my mother actually participating in other ways of augmenting her income. Everybody knows the Tupperware story, the Avon story, and maybe even selling additional fruits and veggies on the side, right, to drive additional income. And Daphne, that makes me want to come to you, both Pearl as well as Olwe, to highlight very critical elements is that, not only are we fighting to get a share of the pie within the formal structure of South Africa's economy, but we also get undervalued in areas and spaces which are not often very well quantified. What does this tell us then about how we need to be re-educating ourselves, re-educating society about the value that women really bring to the table? Clearly, it's not just about what adds up in our bank balance at the end of the month. There's a lot more value to the fundamentals here.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Gugu. So I absolutely agree. Women have been overlooked from an economic perspective in society currently, and that needs to change. And I think we all have personal experiences of how and when we've seen this. Just to relate a personal story. So I grew up in a low to middle income household, and I have firsthand knowledge of how a normal, ordinary South African woman can actually make a massive difference in terms of empowering and changing not just one household, but the economy as well. I think there's three fundamentals when looking in terms of women development and empowering themselves. The one is, if you look at 41.3% of South African households are headed by females. That's a massive number. And given that women are key financial decision makers in households, why then is the gender pay gap sitting at 28%, which means on average, women earn 28% less than men? So we earn less than men, we save less, because statistics show us that we save 10% less than men do. So it's a massive dilemma as South African women. How do we actually change that to ensure that women are empowered enough to make decisions and to ultimately influence not just our family and our smaller units, but the greater family units and future generations going forward as well?
I'd actually like to come to you, Paul, to build up on this one. And I think in terms of what we've identified, there's certainly a lack of the quantification, right, of the economic value that women add. But is it really all about the money bags? Is it all about securing the bag and making sure that the value that we contribute to society translates to what we see in our bank account? Or is there a different ideal that we should be chasing?
Got to be different, right? It has to be different. We're unfortunate to live within a capitalist system that requires inequality in order to function. And so the idea of pursuing wealth on its own only further creates more inequality. If we're trying to build a world that's more equal, that's more inclusive, that values women, we can't do it within the same system that we've been operating. So it's not just about securing the bag. It has to be about how do we broaden our contribution towards society? How do we use the little bit of financial privilege that we may have to help other people? And I think there's our relationship with money as it stands, particularly in a country like this, right, where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is so large that our desire for accumulation is so high. We always want more. There always has to be a side hustle on a side hustle on a side hustle, right? And what it ends up being is we create our relationships with money based on greed, not necessarily on what do I need to live the life that I want and how can I help others to live the lives that they need. And so I think particularly as women, where we see the interconnectedness of our relationships with each other, with men, with children, with all of the people that we have to interact with, women are particularly located in a sense of community just by how we relate to each other. And that should follow through in our financial decisions and our financial pursuits as well.
Olwetu, I'm excited to come to you here because I think for many of us who are young, who have ambitions of being mothers and wives someday, you really paint a beautiful picture of someone who's ticked off the boxes that both Pearl and Daphne have described. Financially independent by creating your own sense of wealth, but also, as Daphne highlighted, prioritizing the development and growth of your own family. So I'm intrigued here. Bring us into, what your relationship with money is and what your lived experience is in contributing economically for yourself, but also for your family and loved ones. What's your lived experience?
So just to give you a bit of history, I come from a middle-class family that both my parents worked in corporate South Africa. So we never lacked growing up. But the hindrances came in later when my parents went through a divorce and they lost everything, literally everything, from our house to the cars, to my dad having to go back home, to my mom having to reestablish and rebuild her life, and my mom being the primary caretaker now to 3 children. So I learned from that, my parents spent their all their lives playing catch up. So it was, we're playing catch up in terms of catching up to our Caucasian counterparts in the work world. We're trying to get the cars, we're trying to get the houses, and once again, the income protection was never something that was taken into consideration. You lapse when you lose income. You lapse on everything, including life cover. You lapse on the home loans. You lapse on this and that. And that was our reality. We had to now rebuild starting from there. And I then had to take a step back, especially when stepping into a relationship, into marriage, into having children, that we're not playing catch up. What catch up should mean to us is being able to ensure that our children's lives are secure, for the next generation's lives to be secure. We need to be able to educate ourselves, not just to educate ourselves to get into the work world, but to educate ourselves to just make a little bit of a better step and a move forward, to ensure financial security for the home, not financial security to make sure that we live hand to mouth every month. Over 60% of households in this country have one income, and that one income is female. And that one female income also is an underpaid income, which also means her pensions are not up to scratch, which also means that she might not find income protection necessary, and it is extremely necessary. She might not find things like life insurance necessary, which are a big necessity because of the impact of her income. And we need to take all these things into consideration when we start making inputs when it comes to finances. How do we start not just having policies, but having advocacy towards regulating the pay gap and closing off that pay gap to ensure women then start seeing these things as necessities because they're able to foot the bill for them.
Pearl, I definitely want to throw it down your alley because this is your area of expertise. You know all about advocacy, getting people on board to fight for a common cause and common purpose. Gender parity, pay parity, gender-based violence, the accountability and quantification of women's economic contribution is not something that we can do alone as 3 ladies involved in this conversation here today. So how do we take that conversation forward to make sure that all parties, including men, are on board not only to understand the consequences of a lack of accountability in terms of women's economic contribution, but making sure that it's as much a priority for them as men as it is for us as women?
Thanks, Gugu. I'm going to pretend like you asked me a simple question. But the thing about advocacy, right? And I think when we think about money, particularly in this country, often when we hear discussions about money, it's as if we don't know who we're talking about, right? So we talk about things like savings, as if savings is a reality for the bulk of the people in this country. It's not. Right? We talk about things like life cover and medical aid and all of these very sort of middle class and upper middle class privileges that most people in this country don't have. And so when we talk about advocacy, for me, it locates itself in people that do not get access to those services, right? When you think about brands like Liberty, how do brands such as Liberty create programming and services that can go to people who don't have the ability to get life cover, who don't have the ability to save as much as their white counterparts, for example? How do we create programming and services that cater to the people who actually need it most in this country? And that's where advocacy comes in. We don't think about finance as something that is a difficult journey. We look at people who are not as privileged, people who are poor in this country, and we think, well, financial literacy is going to solve it, making the assumption that people that are poor are financially illiterate. And that's just untrue. And so I think when we think about advocacy, the first thing is the reimagining of how people, particularly poor people, relate to money and how we relate to them, right? It's about how do we create services that cater to the bulk of this country, the people who are unemployed, the people who don't have access to education, people who don't have access to a bank that can help them think about their financial future, people that don't have bank accounts, because those are the people that need the advocacy. When we think about gender parity, we generally think of it as a women's issue, right? So August is coming, and we're going to get all the wonderful tea parties and the campaigns with men in heels telling us about how much they care. But we look at our gender-based violence statistics and it tells us a whole different story. And all of that is part of financial wellness. A woman can't think about saving money when she also has to think about the fact that she's been beaten in her house. We can't talk about pay disparities when we know that women can't work late at night, because that'll be the reason that you deserved your being raped, right? And so it has to be a multi-layered, multi-stakeholder approach to revaluing women, reevaluating people that don't sit in the middle class in this country, and understanding that unless everybody is on board, and unless we can solve other issues like inequality, the gender pay gap, domestic violence, racism, unless we tackle all of those things, we're kind of having the wrong conversation.
Gosh, PowerPoints that you've shared with us there, Pearl. And I think it really highlights the realization that when speaking about womanomics, we're not just talking about women in isolation and the economic contribution they make, but the various aspects of society and the various elements of our lives highlight the multi-pronged approach to which we live. It's with our partners, it's with our families, it's with our children, it's within the greater society that we serve. And I think on that note, that leads us to our closing remarks and final words of advice in terms of how we can shift and change this landscape regarding what womanomics is. Do you have any final parting words of advice or suggestions or a contribution to make in terms of realigning our thinking, Paul, as to how best we take this conversation forward, so that in 50 years' time, our granddaughters are not having this kind of debate?
I think for me, the main thing is to understand that women are not a sideshow. We often make terms like womanomics, we say things like womandla, and it's the idea that the main word doesn't include women, right? If we say economics, you picture men. So we must say womanomics so that we know we're talking about women. And there's no equal society that can be built when you other people. So for me, the main thing is realizing that in order to build the society we want, we have to mainstream the people that are so consistently left out. And whether that's women, Black women, young women, disabled women, trans women, there's so many different layers to what it means to be a woman. And if we're going to talk about financial wellness, if we're going to talk about equality, we have to do so in a way that includes women in all our forms.
Olwe, to your thoughts and closing remarks?
I'd like to agree, but also disagree on certain points with Pearl. She's going to kill me for this. But I think we need to be intentional about bringing women into economics. And by using the word womanomics, I feel it makes it so intentional to bring women into economic play. It's like Black Lives Matter. We say Black Lives Matter because not all lives matter, but because we need to put a focal point on Black lives at the moment. So I think womanomics is extremely important in setting the intention and saying women, especially in the context of our country where women have always been sidelined, women like you said, Pearl, have been the sideshow, need to be and have been left out so often, but yet are one of the biggest contributors within the home, which is the economy in itself. We need to set the tone and be very intentional. And with a big informal sector like we have in our country, where only 2% of women globally, for example, are sitting at top positions and are earning as they should, and women are the employers in certain setups. We still have a long way to go in ensuring women are, number one, included, number two, within the cycle of economy, but this takes us setting the intention first. And that's why terms like womanomics are extremely important in being able to say, hold on, men, let's align the woman first, and then we'll be able to then round up the economy and look at it all holistically and say, how then do we integrate this all together and ensure that men are educated on womanomics, women know their place in womanomics, and then the bigger scheme of things, which is the economy, is able to integrate all of that.
Amazing point. And I think we're incredibly grateful because this is what the platform is about, hearing divergent views and getting us some insight into what our lived experience is. And Daphne, I'd like to wrap it up with you. And I think taking advantage of the fact that you are young, you're a woman of color, who happens to work for one of the largest corporate organizations, being Liberty, which has brought this platform to the table, which facilitates and allows financial access. What are your closing remarks and thoughts on womanomics, given the various hats that you wear as a Black South African woman, still working for corporate South Africa, but also allowing your influence to change and shift the landscape to the conversation of womanomics?
Thanks, Gugu. I'm also of the agreement that womanomics isn't necessarily a derogatory or a bad term. I absolutely agree. I think the more people that we get on board to understand not really the plight, but the situation of empowering women and ensuring that we reduce this gender pay gap, the better for South Africa as a society as a whole. The three big points that are highlighted up front, that women earn less than men, we live longer than men, and we save less than men, is something I want to drive massively from a financial empowerment perspective. And I think, yes, it does start with reducing the gender pay gap, but we also need to be cognizant that women are having to take on side hustles and having to earn multiple incomes from different income streams to ensure that our income is at a level that we can actually support our families and ultimately share in that pie of saving and investing and protecting our assets.
Women don't only deserve a seat at the table, but it's definitely time that we create our own table and set the agenda. I think some pearls of wisdom have certainly been dropped off here. And of course, let's get some insight from our participants as to what their thoughts are on womanomics.
Remember, if we're trying to build a just and equitable world, women are not the sideshow. We're the main event.
Women have always been left behind. Womanomics sets the tone and says, we make economic sense. Prioritize us now.
To all South African women, we see you and we value your unseen contributions. Remember, done is better than perfect.
Ladies, I'm left in awe. I'm left motivated. I'm left angry, I'm left slightly frustrated, but most importantly, I'm left excited because I know that this is just the beginning of an important conversation that not only needs to take place in South Africa, but the world over to really manage to shift the needle as much as we wanted to. I think very critical points have been managed and raised about the multiplicity of life that women live, is that we actually aren't selfish individuals, but maybe it's time that we start thinking and feeling that way in terms of how we manage our finances and how we self-invest as well. So very divergent views that we've heard here today, but most of all, I think a good start for us in order to build up on the conversation regarding womanomics. So whether it's womandla or amandla, whether it's economics or womanomics, fundamentally, I think one thing is quite clear, is that we all deserve a seat at the table and making sure that we contribute our full efforts to making sure that this is a change that does take place. So to Oluetu, to Daphne, as well as to Pearl, thank you so much, ladies, for your phenomenal conversation that you've participated in here today. We certainly look forward to the contribution that you all three continue to make, not only in the lives of your loved ones, but in the world overall, as you contribute to the shifting landscape. Thank you so much for being in it with us.